Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. This is the second of 2 live episodes that were recorded at the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society's 2023 annual meeting in Houston, Texas. The topic of this panel discussion was achieving landscape scale management in a private land state. As you learned in the previous episode, Texas has very little public land compared to other western states. So large landscape conservation in Texas brings with it a number of extremely unique challenges and opportunities. In this conversation, we heard from 4 of Texas's most respected conservation leaders, individuals who are finding ways to achieve ambitious conservation goals using their own unique skill sets and approaches. I was joined on stage in front of an audience of nearly 600 people by Roel Lopez, who's the director of the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute, Chad Ellis, who is the CEO of the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, Terry Anderson, who's the co-founder of Conservation Equity Management and Conservation Equity Partners, and Billy Tarrant, Associate Director of Stewardship Services at Borderlands Research Institute. You can check out the episode notes for more information on each of the panelists and for links to their respective bios and organizations. As you'll hear in this conversation, there are a wide range of innovative approaches and tools, from academic to nonprofit to market-based. They're allowing Texas to be a trailblazer in private lands conservation. So we had a lot to cover in this hour-long session, including the evolution and use of conservation easements, the importance of building solid relationships with landowners, new conservation tools on the horizon, how Texas has exported its private land conservation tools to other states, data around population growth in Texas, advice for young and aspiring conservationists, and a long list of books, podcasts, and other resources that have influenced these conservation leaders. And just before this conversation, each of the panelists did a brief presentation which summarized all of the important work they're doing in Texas. If you'd like to listen to those talks and access their PowerPoint presentations, there's a link in the episode notes. However, you don't need to listen to those presentations to get full value out of this episode, but they're there if you want to go a little bit deeper. If you're interested in conservation and learning from impressive individuals who've devoted their lives to land, stewardship, and conservation, then I know you'll enjoy this episode. Once again, thanks to John Kinsey and the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society for inviting me down to Houston and for giving me the opportunity to have these meaningful conversations. Hope you enjoy.
Now is the time where I get to ask a bunch of really aggressive, politically charged follow-up questions. Just joking. My name is Ed Robertson. I have a podcast called Mountain and Prairie, but I really owe the conservation community with kind of where my career has ended up. If you went back to when I was 22, 23, I was focused on finance. And then I kind of got even farther down the path, and I got focused on real estate development. I'm like, I want to be a real estate developer. I want to be putting in these neighborhoods like we saw in these satellite images. And through a lot of luck and a lot of great relationships with the conservation community, particularly in Colorado, I was able to kind of pull out of that nosedive and apply any of the meager brain power I have to conservation work. And so it's really just an honor and a dream come true to be here with all of you, because I really personally, from a selfish standpoint, I owe the conservation community kind of anything good that's happened to me has been because of the conservation community bringing me in. And so the fact that I get to hang out with you guys for a few days and ask these kind of all-stars a lot of questions, it's really a dream come true. I've been on some Zoom calls with these guys as well, and I'll go ahead and warn you, they give each other a hard time, and I very well may not ask any more questions other than the first one. Generally, when I do these panels, I like to kind of go down the road, but there's so much overlap. You know, if you think about all these presentations and the Venn diagram, there's so much overlap. So what I may do is just kind of throw out questions to the group, but I will direct this first one at Roel and Chad. Before I went all in on this podcast stuff, I was a conservation director at a regional land trust in Colorado, and we obviously did a lot of conservation easements. And I would love to hear from you guys how the conservation easement as a tool has become more accepted over the years. Because I think if you went back, 1993, and you went out to the average rancher in Texas and started telling them about conservation easement, you'd get a much different reaction than you do now, probably in a big way. And so could you guys just talk about maybe how that tool has evolved and then why you think it's evolved in that way?
I'm going to let Chad kick us off, and if for the young professionals, maybe briefly, what's a conservation easement?
Sure. So a conservation easement, right, is a tool in a toolbox that we basically are giving up a bundle of rights, and that bundle of rights, is development. So we're being able to intact that ranch or farm intact perpetually, forever. And so it's a big commitment, and it is a contractual. It's like a real estate transaction, but bundling that particular right. One of the things, Ed, I think is I think of Blair Fitzsimmons, and Blair, you guys that don't know, was the founder of Texas Ag Land Trust. And she had the hard job, right? She had the job of having to go into those meetings, talk about something that a lot of people looked at as, whoa, this is government overreach. This is hurting potentially my rights, my private property rights, which is and trying to change that paradigm, right? Because perception is reality, and that's what was happening as a new tool. Fast forward to today, I've had the fun part, of falling behind Blair, of a great foundation that was placed. And I think timing and dynamics is changed. A lot of things Roel has talked about, where the conversation isn't, it's actually positive of us moving. One of the things it's interesting, we're starting 15 years, Ed, and we've put over 300,000 acres of conservation easements across the state. The thing that's amazing to me, it's not just the acres, it's about the families we've helped empower. We've helped empower 42 families, right, to keep that heritage and legacy and that conservation on the ground. And that's what's been pretty great on that. I think one of the other pieces that I want to hit, Ed, and then let Roel kind of fill in the gaps, is it's us talking about beyond the acres, right? That's the one thing that I stressed at TALT is like, great, we have 300,000 acres, but what does that mean to society, right? What does that mean? Those 300,000 acres that we've helped that are across this state is providing, water, right? A water conservation over enough. And so I always ask the question of how many water bottles does those land stewards, those 300,000 acres, are able to fill in 1 year? Any guesses? Yeah, it's over 500 billion. Wow, water bottles, right? That's the thing that we have to do and think about tools and conversation of that, what that stewardship means, right, to everyone.
That's great.
2 points. The first is when you look at the interest and acceptance of conservation easements as a tool from private landowners, there has been a change. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, less than 10% of landowners had that interest. Now, from recent survey work, almost a third, approaching a half, about 40% of landowners are receptive and interested to learn more. So it is a tool that's voluntary, that really serves as an anchor to broader suite of conservation. The other thing that I think is important to note that I find interesting is I'm involved with land trusts of various types, and there's been an evolution in terms of even the land trust community. These are organizations that basically manage and steward these conservation easements, but it's interesting to see them emerging into these other types of activities. So the conservation easement becomes an anchor, not the only tool. So the metaphorical toolbox, that's one tool, but now there's 4 or 5 others under mitigation banking or ecosystem services, biodiversity, education and outreach activities. And so again, land trusts really, I think, have evolved in terms of the kind of work that they do that goes well beyond conservation easements, and TALT, I think, is a real good example of such an organization.
Yeah, and I feel like at the basis of all, you've got all these tools that can be extremely complex, sometimes hard to understand, but at the base is all of y'all's ability to form relationships. And Billy spoke about this just in his kind of closing remarks there. And, in Colorado, where I live, in eastern Colorado, the Nature Conservancy has made really great strides along with the Cattlemen's Land Trust. And it's because they've been building relationships one after another. They've got people that have stayed in their roles for many, many years, been able to build these relationships with ranching families so they know it's not somebody just coming in with this opportunity and then leaving. And so I'd love across the board if you guys could expand a bit more on the relationship side of things, because in my experience, and I'm not as good at it as y'all, but you start talking about all the details of conservation easements or any of these tools and you can see people's eyes start glazing over. So there's a lot more to it than just doing real estate deals. Can y'all talk about the importance of building those relationships slowly and building a good foundation? And that can be for anybody. You want to start?
Yeah, it comes down to trust, right?
Yes, yeah, trust.
I mean, that's really what it's all about. If you show up knocking on somebody's door and say, "Hey, I've got this great thing," and it's immediately perceived to be some federal program, some smoke and mirrors angle,
yep,
right? So it's about building trust, and you don't do that overnight. And it takes day after day, and it takes the Blairs and the Chads. It just takes time. And then there's a social side. It's not just individually, I don't trust you. We're going through this whole movement, and it's good. We're in a place where conservation easements are more well received. I'll go back to real numbers for you again. Not too many years ago, if we placed an easement, like one of Chad's easements on a ranch, and that ranch was worth $1 million, we would make an assumption that once we put that easement, that ranch was now only worth $500,000. So we lost $500,000 if we ever decided to sell that ranch. So in order to justify doing that, whatever we got paid to give that conservation easement better be worth at least $500,000, because we just lost $500,000 by putting an easement on it. So either Chet had to pay me, or somebody had to fill in the gap. Now we may see a scenario where we place one of his easements on a property and it's worth $1 million, and 2 years later, 18 months later, it's now worth $1.2 million, because people, the diminution value is not there. It doesn't scare people. It makes people feel comfortable. You couldn't get that. Yeah. Again, you couldn't get that in Texas, not in this private land state 10 years ago. So it's changing for the good.
There's a great article, Terry, about you that was written on I believe it was a Republic Ranches magazine, and there was a quote you had in there where you described kind of where progress meets nature as fault lines, and I thought that was a really a great analogy. And there was a quote where you said where those fault lines are where nature and necessity meet. And so we've got the conservation easement that's been a tool to help with that. Can you talk about a few of the tools that you're really excited about now? I mean, maybe some tools that 20 years from now, when we're sitting here 2043, we'll be talking about the old days when nobody really knew about them, nobody really accepted them. Is there anything you're really excited about?
I think I go back to the whole factory thing again, and how it's been kind of the great head fake. Because if we're all blessed to live here in this state, spend time in this state, we got pretty good clean air, right? We get pretty places. You drive outside of town, whether you live in Austin or Dallas or anywhere, and you head out, it's pretty places, right? Open space, all the things that were on his slides. And we took that for granted, that would just be there. And when we turn on our tap to get our water or brush our teeth, we make a basic assumption every morning that when we turn that tap on, the water's going to come out. And if it doesn't, it's a damn tragedy. If we get a freeze in Texas, it gets to basically 31 degrees, and our world just shuts down. We're used to the things we want. And where we're moving into now that's exciting is we're reaching a time where if we want that clean water and we want the clean air and we want those open spaces, you can't take it for granted anymore, or it'll be gone soon. Just like those slides of the Katy Prairie, it will be gone. And we're not in an era now where we're just wringing our hands going to watch it all go away. It's like, okay, how do we value those ecosystem services? How do I go to those 10 ranchers out there that have that open space and get, not just ask them out of the goodness of their heart, please don't sell your land to a subdivision, but say, you can make more money keeping this as rural land. It makes sense for you to keep this as rural land, and you can still pay your bills, you can pay your taxes, it can be profitable to manage rural assets for rural outcomes. And so seeing scenarios where everybody in Dallas and Houston and everywhere gets 10 cents on their water bill, right? $1. Every million customers that's in the North Texas Water Municipality, every million customers, if they all pay $1, then it's $1 million a month, right? That can go straight into doing more things like the Edwards Aquifer project and paying for conservation easements and protecting that green space around it. So the ability to get these basic ecosystem services in a way to pay for it, not philanthropically, but a way to pay for it. And because of the number of people we've got living in Houston and Dallas, and Roel just threw out the numbers on how many people are living in these urban centers, the fact that we're developing these tools where they're footing the bill, right? And it's just not free for them. I think it's really cool.
If I could just add something. Please. So Ed, and this is really for the young professionals. Chad asked the question, how many are less than 5 years of experience or 10 or what have you, and the majority of the folks in this room raise their hand. And so a lot of what we're talking about is the opportunity for you to really solve some very thorny, complicated issues. Mm-hmm. And so Chad said we're in the relationship business. Very true. We're in the people business in a very broad sense. And what that means is gaining skills in human dimensions, gaining skills in communication, policy, storytelling is what I call it, is probably the most impactful set of tools that you could add to your professional toolbox. And so I encourage you to pursue those type of things, because if this was easy, we would have solved this.
Yeah.
Maybe one of us. Maybe Billy probably. Right? But we're not there, and it's very fluid. I mean, that's basically what's happening. And when I say that's the conversation, that's the situation, if you will. And so the opportunity for you guys to make a durable and positive impact long term is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's for the younger folks, it really is worth thinking about just the shift in conservation easements, just that one tool and what all these smart folks have accomplished in a relatively short period of time. And it's very, very inspiring across the board. Yes, sir.
We told you probably won't get to talk much. Ed. On a podcast where he doesn't get to talk. When you asked, what is important, how do we get there? What, as far as partnerships, how do we build that? And Terry and I both came up with I was like, trust. That's what you have to build trust. And this is a little philosophical, but every one of you, either now or when you start your professional career, are going to be touching decision makers on the land. You're going to be building relationships, and those relationships, it can't be a job. It's not just a job, right? It is a passion, and you are building a relationship with landowners, and you're going to be the ones that once they build that trust with you, you can begin to help them make good decisions, right? And if they have an interest in conservation easements or any of these other tools, those resources are available, but they're not going to listen to you until you build the trust, thus the interpersonal dialogue. Does that make sense? And I was challenged at one point in my career to do my job and quit worrying about relationships. Issue your deer permits and get on down the road. It's the exact quote I heard. And I thought about that. I said, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? Is that how? No. Actually Carter Smith talked me off that ledge. He said, no, your job is beyond your career. If you were in this for the money and just get a job, you could have picked a much more lucrative job. We all know that. It's a passion, and that trust that you build with those decision makers is based upon that passion, that you care about them, you care about what they're doing, and you want the best for them. So every one of us, every one of you is going to make an impact real soon if you're not already doing it. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think from the private landowner's perspective, right, their first major decision, if they decide, hey, the conservation easement is right for us, right? It's voluntary. They need to make sure it fits for them and their family. But their first decision is picking the right easement holder, right?
Yeah.
That they have trust. It's a partnership. Perpetual is a damn long time, right? And we're talking generations of the family being part. And it is a family. I mean, when I talk about Texas Ag Land Trust, and we think about, I mentioned the 42 families, it's one family of the Talt family, right? We're all together. And it's not just when we end and we close that conservation easement, it's not a one-time, we come and monitor that easement. We're there with them, right? All the way, no matter what it may be, right? And so it's a partnership. It is a true family. And I think, that's the thing when I talk with landowners, I tell them that this is your first choice. And if Talt is not the right one and we're not the right and we're not aligned, that's okay with me, right? I'm going to help you find the land trust or the organization that's the best fit for you. Because at the end of the day, we're still moving the needle. We're still helping empower those families and move forward. And I think it's really important, right? And we've all said it, right? We're in the relationship business first, conservation business second.
Well, and I know it taught a lot of the lessons that you've learned through relationship building, through getting so many acres under management. And across the board, across all of your organizations, y'all have been able to export some of those lessons to other parts of the country. And I think that's what's one of the many things that's so cool about Texas is by necessity you're having to be innovative. And so what you're doing is protecting your backyard, and that's great. But it makes this ripple effect that goes out far beyond Texas, all the way up to Colorado, Montana, your work with port, which I'd like to talk about in a minute. But could y'all talk a bit about maybe some of the innovations on the conservation side of things or land stewardship side of things that have been able to be exported or shared beyond the borders of Texas so that people like me up in Colorado benefit from it? Port could be a great example of what you...
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of examples. It's kind of where we started. And that's the thing is that it's having this collaborative conservation mind, right? I think that's the first piece. And conservation doesn't know boundaries, right? So it's not just state boundaries or even fence lines of ranches to ranches. The Partnership of Rangeland Trust is a great example. The Partnership of Rangeland Trust is an organization that Talt is part of with 8 other land trusts in the Great Plains and out west. And we're all like-minded land trusts that are working landscapes, trying to work with those farmers and ranchers and foresters of keeping that aspect together. And it's important because if you look at port, just the impact of port, we have over 3 million acres under conservation easement in 12 states of us as an organization. That organization, we go to Washington, D.C., we're thinking of policy changes and what needs to happen to enhance the tools for us on the ground. And it's really key for us. And those are great examples. There's many other organizations and those partnerships that really help. The one thing that when we think about innovation, and this is something that's been on my mind from day one of coming to Talt, right? At that time, we had a lot of, we're 15 years old as an organization, right? We're already seeing a lot of those families that have decided to put a conservation easement on their property. They're handing that property or those managements to the next generation, right? And I always talk about that generation is already taking a bite of the conservation apple, right? There's one last bite of that apple. That tool has been utilized. So how do we, at the end of the day, they're running a business and we got to keep them viable. And that's where these ecosystem service markets and things like that, we have to be creative. And how do we keep incentivizing and bringing financial streams back to that family to keep putting conservation on the ground? And one thing that's nice when we think about carbon markets, water markets, biodiversity markets, and we have these corporations that have ESG goals and sustainability goals that are trying to meet the needs from the board and shareholders. One of the nice things about conservation easement, when they make that investment into one of those that has an easement, there's an automatic return on investment that they know that's not going to be a parking lot, right?
Yeah.
That money is going to be utilized for conservation for good. Where if it doesn't have that easement, there's a risk, right? And from a business perspective.
Yes, please.
So one example that comes to my mind that's unique to a degree with Texas is the fact that we're a private land state, and we are also home to about 120 endangered species, candidate species. And so the nexus of endangered species and private land stewardship is really very fascinating or interesting. And so when you think of some of these innovative strategies and tools, like a recovery credit system, and I'm not saying that's the best tool, or like gopher tortoise trading, or the dune sagebrush lizard, Texas Conservation Plan, some of the more recent work with ocelots and translocation. The point is those started here, and since then have been transferred to other parts of the country. And so those are some examples that have early roots to Texas. And the thing to remember about that is that they weren't necessarily the most precise and perfect model, nor was the first car, right? It didn't have all the features, and it sputtered and clanked around and so forth. And so that's that part of that evolution, and that's where I keep going back to the young professionals, because it's up to you to sort of take those concepts and ideas and refine the work that have come before you to make it a better car, a better tool or model.
Yeah, and in my experience, grant writing, I found that the more you can demonstrate that your project is going to have those ripple effects, the more money comes in. And so it's good all the way around, but it's a good marketing, a way to tell the story as well. And Roel, one question that popped in my mind when I was looking at your presentation was the population projections, and I think it started at 2010. But I was wondering if you went back to, like, say 2000 or to 1990, were the numbers and were the experts expecting us to be where we are now?
Absolutely. So in the mid 90s, we were at about 20 million Texans. So from 1995, 1997 to today, we're at 30. And so the projections were very accurate from 20 years ago. If you remember that graph, it basically had three lines. Yeah. And the top line is the likely scenario. And to Chad's, I think, earlier point, it's probably higher than that. It probably is, because there's been so many recent changes with COVID and this pretty massive shift of these large industries like Tesla and so forth. We don't have a full understanding of what those impacts are, because that type of data, there's a little bit of a lag. But that's something that we were aware of 20 plus years ago, and we certainly know what it's going to look like in the next 20 to 30 years. And that's part of the mix, I guess.
I think that's one of the other pieces too, Roel, is thinking about, this collision, right, of population, land fragmentation, and how do we address it. And, we're kind of go back to the value of ecosystem services in your work, Roel, of $629 on average, right, of basically $90 billion when we look at it. But we don't talk about losing, say, 1,000 acres a day. We just use, those numbers, right? 1,000 acres a day for a year, 365. What is the loss, right? Yeah. So we're losing over $220 million. That's just 1 year, but really, when we think about it, it's compounded because those lands are gone, right, forever, and so we're going to keep losing. So what's it going to cost us if we don't invest in conservation today? And these are the things where we're coming together, and I think from we have momentum maybe here in the state to be innovative and think about a water and land conservation fund of $1 billion to $2 billion that's helping fund these projects and keep Texas.
Yeah. as you guys talk about the relationships and you're able to explain these complex issues in ways that resonate with an audience, Roel, you mentioned a minute ago to the young folks that they should really be focused in on storytelling. And I think everybody up here would agree. And when I look at all your different marketing materials and your presentations, you're all master storytellers. Do you have any specific advice for young folks? Like, well, I want to be a better storyteller, but I don't know how you do that other than going out and, like, the way I learned was go out and make a fool of myself until I got it right. Yeah,
that's kind of what we do.
So other than that, do you have any advice?
So there's two things. I'm not going to answer your question just yet. I'm going to go back to an earlier question.
Yeah.
We've talked about trust and relationship building and so forth, right? There's two pieces to that are probably most critical. The first is follow through, and the second is protection. Follow through on what you say you're going to do with the landowner and so forth. Because it's easy to lose that trust and lose that relationship. And trying to regain that trust and so forth may take years, if never, right? Yeah. And so that's the protection part of it. And so that's I think a real important piece to young professionals in understanding that aspect of working with private landowners. We're emphasizing that because that's the reality. If you want to have an impact on conservation in Texas, you've got to interface with landowners and better understanding their objectives and what their passions and interests are is really important. Now transitioning into your question. So the storytelling piece is being able to take those maybe complicated relationships and issues and simplifying them and connecting the dots for the broader public. I'm a firm believer that one of the most important things that we can do in conservation is communicating the public benefits of private lands. And in order for us to do that, the skill set of communicating via social media, communicating versus graphics that are engaging and so forth, use of videos, you name it. I'm constantly inspired and amazed by young people just because you've grown up in a generation where the storytelling is done in a very rapid and a very different way. Podcasts and Instagram and so forth. And I'll be honest, I may not be a user of those things. I understand the value of those. It's powerful. It's a powerful thing. And so I think understanding those type of things and how to better do it within a conservation construct is the advice I would give you. So, and I'll give an example within our department. We actually developed a new course called Communicating in Natural Resources. And the whole focus of that is being able to take messages that are science technical based and translating them in a way that's effective and can help connect and tell that story. Mm-hmm. I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, you have to learn how to do that. And you do that through practice and you try to avoid pitfalls. Because sometimes those pitfalls could be costly.
Yep.
And that's the care that you have to give.
I'm going to give you another story. Just validate why all this, again, is so important. 2-3 months ago, I met with a group that, kind of like an Elon Musk-like group that's moving to Texas. Everybody's moving to Texas. They're coming out of New York. They're a financial group, and they're moving to Dallas, Texas, and Fort Worth, primarily Dallas. So over the next 3 years, they're going to move 3,000 of their upper-level professionals to Dallas. At first you go like, well, 3,000 more people. Dallas is already huge. What does that matter? But as we were sitting there and they were kind of walking me through that, man, this is 3,000 families, right? Not just 3,000 people, 3,000 families. And he made the point that these are upper-level executives. So there aren't 3,000 homes in Dallas today. Wow. That those people can buy. Those homes don't exist today at that level. But the thing that really brought it home from the significance to this group, they said, so 2/3 of those, so 2,000 of those people, within 8 months of moving here, they're going to want their second home, their weekend home. Wow. They're going into the hill country. They're not going to all just go within. A lot of them are going to get spread out around the outskirts of Dallas and Fort Worth. Some are going to go to Austin. Some are going to go to Marathon. But that's 2,000 new rural landowners that will be here next year that have nothing. They've never been to a meeting like this. They're rolling up out of New York, and who knows where they came from in the world. But the reality is that's 2,000 new rural landowners that will own a space. And you may be, if you're just graduated and you're working for the state, you've been in it your whole career, you're going to roll out there to meet this landowner, and he's so excited and he's got it, but you have no idea what he's thinking. And there's no really way to know. So the dynamics of that kind of change, it's not just how we're getting more educated and learning, but those big shifts are dramatic. And that's where we got to be able to talk to people. And if we don't like it, you may be that natural resource professional that goes out there, and the first thing they tell you makes you want to throw up on your shoes, right? Because he's got this beautiful native grass scenario, and I want to put up a high fence and grow ostriches. I'm going to put kangaroos out here. Or I'm going to clear cut this forest and convert it to something beautiful. I want it flowers. I don't want all this wild native stuff. I want beautiful flowers, I want something it may be just literally but you can't just slap him in the face and walk away.
You can't?
Because
you can. Yeah.
You can, but there's another, he's got 2,000 buddies.
Oh, forgot
so
that part.
This is why the communication thing is so important, because we're changing so fast. And half of us that have been around here for 20 or 30 years, I see Dale Prohaska sitting back there. I mean, we've been thinking the same thing and doing it the same way, and thinking that when that landowner calls, we know what he wants, because it's just what the other 10 landowners wanted, and this is what we're going to tell him, and by God, this is how we're going to do it, because that's just the way we do it. Can't do it anymore.
I think one of the key pieces, right, is there's science behind all this. And I've learned it over the career of this aspect of generational learners, right? Every generation's learn and uptake information differently. And you have to understand that, right? Yep. And we think about personalities, right? I mean, one of the greatest books that helped my career is How Do You Speed Read People, right? How do you understand their personality in just a few questions? And be able to not give the information to them the same way like you did the last 10, right? And understand how do you need to present that to help? Because one, that helps build the relationship, it helps build the trust, it helps get them to their goal and objectives quicker.
You guys are just opening the door, and I can't help it. Excuse me. In fact, you even mentioned Dale. I mean, Dale and Calvin and I were on a text string a couple weeks back that kind of happened by accident. And it really honed in on another challenge, right? One more big challenge we have. And I think it should probably be a plenary session at some point for Texas chapter. Yes, you guys are all going to be touching landowners. You're going to be having this dialogue. To your point, Terry, this is the time. We're seeing the biggest, not only intergenerational change, but a completely change in the demographics of our landowners in the state. And our ability as agencies and organizations to deliver technical guidance ain't where it needs to be. It's a long ways from where it needs to be. We don't have the ability to reach these individuals who don't have a clue, and they want to do some crazy stuff, This is a challenge. Y'all are going to all have an impact, without a doubt, but there needs to be about 5 times as many of you.
Yeah, and the cool upside is that we're humans are creatures of habit. So once we've owned something for a while, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, then we kind of get in that space. We know what's going on out here, and we don't like change. And so one of the worst things was to be a young technical biologist and go talk to a bunch of 70-year-olds about how to change their landscape. Son, ma'am, why don't you get back in the truck going down the road? I've been doing this for 100 years on this property. That was hard. Best thing in the world is to roll in there with a new landowner from New York or California who doesn't know anything about it. You got an open canvas. And if you can get some dialogue with that guy, you go do something. And he probably has the capital to do it.
Yeah.
It's not like How do I put 10 more cows on this piece of property or produce, 4 more square bales? What do I need to do? I got to grind some money out of this. That's the new thing, the exciting thing about landowners.
I think that's one of the other challenges, though, Terry, is that we have, this new landowner, right? New to the landowner that has the means. They're coming from a professional buying land. They're going to implement something. There's a way that we're missing, and there's innovation that someone in this group is going to come up with. We have to engage with them before they buy the property.
Yep.
I feel there's a lot of people that have a goal and objective in their mind. They buy a piece of property, and we come and work with them, and it's like, you're never going to meet that goal and objective, right?
Yeah.
We needed to buy another piece of property, and so, but they're going to do something, right? And so there's that aspect of how do we engage into a clientele that's new, that doesn't know, right, all of these biologists exist.
Yep.
And so I think that's another challenge.
Again, it's just relationships. You got some of the biggest technical experts you can find up here, but it just keeps coming back to relationships. And that brings me to another type of relationships, which I brought up last night during my session, but I think it's really worth drilling down, is the relationship with politicians, whether local, state, federal. And I say that this podcast, it's all an instruction manual to my younger self. And I used to be the kind of guy who was like, I'm not going to talk to anybody in Washington, D.C. They don't care. Why would I waste my time? And then I mentioned last night I went, and that's with Romy Swanson for some land trust work. And I learned the power of conservation, and that whether I was going into the Democrat or the Republican, they were both happy to see me, and they mostly happy to see me, and they all listened. And we were able to really make some changes by having these conversations, by telling them stories that they needed to hear. Not that the landowners particularly needed to hear, but that politician needed to hear. And so, Chad, you mentioned that you're headed to D.C. next week. So I'd love to hear from any of y'all about the importance of developing those relationships with politicians. And it could be on any level from all the way up to D.C.
Yeah, it's extremely important, right? I mean, that's part of it. It is a relationship. It's, you don't know what you don't know, right? And if we look and put ourselves in those aspects of the staffers, the politicians, and things that are making changes, they have to know everything, right? And so it's about the relationship and building a trust with them where they can go to you. The advantage we have, right, is conservation is bipartisan.
Yep.
Right? Yep. And so that makes it actually much easier for us to have those conversations and explain the need on the ground.
We don't make headway by preaching to the choir. But preaching to the choir is the fun part, because we all know we're going to agree when we go in there. We're going to go. A lot of us are going to go to the bar at some point this afternoon and tell old war stories and sit there and talk, and that's all good. But it's really the ability to go meet with the people who don't agree with you, which is really where we have kind of dark clouds on the horizon, and it's so problematic in our country right now. With this chaos that we've got. I mean, we need to be able to go talk to, whether they're politicians or landowners, whoever. We need to go talk to the ones that don't agree with us, or don't look like us, or don't think like us, and figure out a way to have a conversation.
Right.
That's the only way to bring it back around and do something positive on the land. And again, we're all creatures of habit. It's easier to go, if I come in the room and there's 5 little cliques over here, where do I want to go? I want to go to my clique, because they all like me and we're going to talk good. It's all going to be fine. But we need to go sit down in one of those cliques that don't and figure out, let's not throw rocks at each other, but let's have a good conversation about water or white-tailed deer or CWD, or about, high-fence deer breeding. Pick a topic. Mountain lions. Right?
We'll pick that topic.
Yeah, let's start that. But if we don't talk about it, we don't solve anything.
Right.
So it's so important.
Can I jump in, Billy?
No, I'm going to go. No, go ahead, Roel.
No.
Go ahead. Go.
Square off.
I'm kidding. Go.
Go ahead.
All I was going to say was at the
As I was saying. I knew it was coming.
At the local level, right? The local politicians. I want to throw that in there real quick. That's something that we thought about through the Respect Big Bend effort, was informing. We went out of our way to inform our local elected officials throughout the entire process, structured and unstructured. And we put several of them on our stakeholder advisory group. for your local conservation initiatives that y'all go through in the future, I think that's vitally important, because they are a resource that their constituents go to for information, and they need to know what's going on. I'll just throw that out there. That's important.
So I want to just go back to the tools and the toolbox of these young professionals. We've talked about the ability to communicate and policy understanding and economics and things of that sort. The other thing that we're hearing from these practitioners, these innovators, is the power of persuasion. The power of persuasion. And so when we use the term storytelling, I'm not looking for you to tell me a story to just keep me occupied. I'm looking for a story to facilitate a change, right? And so I think it was Terry that said, you're going to get these crazy ideas of these new landowners wanting to, raise penguins in West Texas. And so part of our job, part of our vocation as a natural resource professional is to educate, to share with, penguins don't do very well in Marathon, Texas, the last time I looked. And these are the reasons why. And so it's really trying to persuade new stewards to practice stewardship in a way that's scientifically sound as best you can. So that's a skill set that you've got to learn, and do it in a very diplomatic way. So it's not just saying, well, you're stupid, you can't do that, penguins won't grow there. It's like, instead of penguins, you might look at pronghorns, same coloration, and they're actually bigger, and I never thought about that kind of thing. And so I think that's, I make a joke out of it, but I think that's an important aspect to it.
I think you're exactly right, Roel. And I think one of the things is, like, when we build those relationships, it's not us going in there saying, we need this, right? Yeah. There's actually an education component. And I think of a lot of examples, Ed, that we've done, or I've done over the years, is education focus, right? I mean, we're setting up now. Eric and I were on a call earlier this week of setting up to do a 101 conservation easement to all staffers in the House Ag Committee, right? To get them knowledgeable, to understand, to make better decisions as they go through the Farm Bill. I think of another time of And this is really the trick of where you have to do is get them on the ground, not just in the conversation in their offices when they're back in district, or you can go to them and get them on the ground to a ranch, let them see and feel and touch.
Yep.
And this was a couple of farm bills ago, and it took some time, but we worked with Robert's staff in Kansas, and we were able to get staffers on the ground, and we did a prescribed burn.
Oh,
and
cool.
Actually got torches, in their hands for them to actually do that, right? And so those things made huge impacts of action.
Yeah. So another real world example, I'm part of the Texas Wildlife Association. There's an oil and gas company that's going to pump several $100,000 into a conservation literacy effort for TWA. To just pay for a couple more educators to be out there providing conservation literacy in some of these urban communities, which, again, where we need it, right? Where the people are. And that's all ESG money. And it's just, TWA would like to hire, I'm sure, 10 more, 20 more educators, We'd like to have one in every school district, but you got to pay the bills, right? So having, again, a company, that would have been unheard of not too many years ago, to say, I need you to commit $300,000 or $400,000 over the next few years to pay for a few teachers to go spend time talking about pronghorns and penguins in Houston. Well, what's that get me? How does that get more hydrocarbons out of the ground? What does that do to my bottom line? Well, now it does a lot, because the social pressure that's on that corporation to do good things to the land, and those monies are going to get spent somewhere. So those monies could have just as easily slid off into some other non-conservation scenario to tell a story that was not a good story from our standpoint. So again, the dialogue matters.
ESGs, I think that's actually a game changer. Our conversations with oil and gas as of late, that's those opportunities, and being able to have those conversations with decision makers in industry, that they can utilize this shareholder pressure that they have for sustainability. They can utilize that through conservation in this state is an important message that we need to keep working on. Once again, dialogue and education with industry decision makers.
What I think is a generational moment. I truly believe it today, because I've been in this space for 30-something years and largely dealing in the regulatory world of the Corps and the EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, working as a liaison to solve these problems. And for most of my career, if you were sitting there and your job's to build a pipeline, you work for TxDOT, you're an engineer, you got to build roads. One of the greatest things, the fears you had, was when the EPA or the Corps showed up and said, oh, there's a regulatory issue here. You can't build your road. You can't build your pipeline. Now, if you go spend this money and buy these offsets or credits, or you restore 1,000 feet of stream over here, then we'll let you make this go away. But there was a process. But the only reason they restored that 1,000 linear feet of stream, and the only reason they helped that endangered species, was this regulatory hook of this federal agency punching them in the face saying, stop, you can't do what you want to do unless you offset this. So that was powerful. I mean, you had federal law standing there saying, you will do conservation. Now we're in this whole space, and some of it's due to cancel culture and COVID and social media and everything else and this ESG movement. And we're in a space where the thing that the corporate America fears the most is social pressure. Nobody ever heard the term social license to operate a few years ago in this. What does that even mean? Well, it means if you're going to function in some region, whether you're making Coca-Cola water or selling cars, you better be socially accepted in the area, or you may be pushed out of the area. So now these companies are they're spending money on TWA to go educate, provide conservation literacy. They're paying $50 million for pollinator projects around the U.S. Not because of a federal law, not because of philanthropy, because of social pressure. Yep. That's the most amorphous thing. I mean, you can't even find it. You can't put your hand on it. But it's there in an extremely powerful way, and it can have really negative consequences, but it can also be directed in amazingly positive-like outcomes. So this whole, it's so fascinating right now that we're seeing this big twist where there's a focus to spend money on good things from a conservation.
There's another layer on top of that, Terry, too, that probably many of us in this audience don't realize or understand. Is actually there's industries that are making some of this too. So it's bigger than just a corporation. So I'm chair-elect of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Meat.
Okay.
Right? And so that organization is from producers all the way through the full value chain, to retail, like to the McDonald's, et cetera. But we're in the process now from an industry, right, from the beef industry, of setting basically goals for everyone to meet moving forward, right? So that's not a corporation. That's the industry coming together saying, we're going to meet these sustainability goals, and we're putting the flag in the ground, and we're moving forward together as a whole industry, from ranchers, to execs and corporations and everybody in between.
And he didn't say anything about bobwhite quail, but what he just described is a massive bobwhite quail enhancement program.
Yeah.
Quail on the ground didn't know anything about regenerative beef or why McDonald's is doing it, but it's just package it another way. Right?
I got two more main questions for you. One of the reasons I started this podcast is because I'd go out to lunch or I'd have, business meeting or whatever with folks like y'all. And I was just so intrigued by how did these people get so obsessed with what they're doing? Because, y'all could be doing a million different jobs, but you're devoting your time and your energy to these important conservation issues. And maybe I should have been a psychiatrist or something, because I was always just trying to figure out, how do these people operate? And one of the questions that I'd ask is books that they've read or resources, whether it's films, podcasts, whatever, but mostly books that have helped kind of shape their worldview. And so selfishly, I'd love to know if there's any particular books that have helped kind of lead you to where you are professionally. And then I think probably some of the younger folks out in the audience would also like to read them. But you can just throw them out. We don't need to go in order. But if there are any that come to mind, I'm sure there's some of the classics like Aldo Leopold. I'm a weirdly obsessed with Theodore Roosevelt to the point that I'm scared his estate might come after me and try to sue me. But any books or conservation heroes that come to mind?
We don't read books.
Good to Great.
Oh yeah,
It's
that's
a phenomenal
really
book. It's written about Fortune 500 companies. You would think, and you do a biologist, it's all about being a biologist. But it's about getting the right people on the bus and getting the right message and then delivering that in a really powerful way.
That's pretty simple. That's one that's definitely influenced me as well, Terry. I would say 7 Habits of people, right, with Covey and you're sitting there as a conservationist. Why are you reading business, books, right? But it's that aspect of relationships and understanding those aspects. And conservation is a business.
Yes.
Right? And I think we overlook a lot of that.
For me, a book that I kind of point to in terms of conservation practices is by Aldo Starker Leopold, the son of Aldo Leopold, and it's California Quail. So California Quail is a classic book. Most people haven't read it, but it's a real interesting book talking about just stewardship and habitat management and so forth through the eyes of that specific species and some of the challenges and opportunities that sort of came out of that. So.
Yeah. Billy, you got anything?
Yeah, no.
Green eggs and ham.
That was it. Anything by Dr. Seuss, I'm all over it. Honestly, you guys keep saying names of books that I read early on, right? I have not had the chance to read. I've got a long list of stuff I want to read, and the conservation literature that I have read over the last 10 or 15 years is typically shorter stuff. There is one, and I'm trying to remember, Lewis probably knows it, that really blew my mind about development by design by Joe Kiesicker. I'm trying to remember the name of that book, but that is, if you want to talk about the term energy sprawl on the planet, I wish I could. Do you remember it, Lewis? Energy sprawl. That's what it's called. That's a short book. It's a quick read. That's all I can do.
like short books. That's good.
Short, quick read. It is so fascinating, this whole concept of the impact of energy taking over, and the need for energy across the planet, right? We need it. We got to have it. And that's probably the last one I read when I got this gig that really made an impact on me. So.
Well, and for people who are listening, the recorded, we'll have links in the notes so people can click through. Kind of final question for y'all. When I was doing my research, one of the things that kept coming up was being proactive. The time to be defensive with conservation is over, and you are all completely focused on leaning into it, and you're all optimists. You're hard-nosed, you get stuff done, but you wouldn't be doing this if you didn't think you could make an impact. And so I'd love to wrap up with just something that's given each of you hope. Something that you're excited about, something that you kind of wake up in the morning excited about, ready to go, and that kind of gives you the fuel to keep doing this important but extremely challenging work. You want to go, Roel?
Sure. Actually, I'm going to let Billy start. I need to think about that.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I got it. It's two things together. Everything we've talked about, these emerging markets, conservation easements, the tools for conservation that we have, we're working on our end of the state with, cost share opportunities, building those relationships, and more importantly, this room of young professionals. Every time I come here and we're going to make it. It's going to happen. Y'all are going to get it done, and that's optimism. That really feeds it. So.
Yeah, no, I'd say this young group. People out here, you could. And a lot of y'all are there's probably some sophomores in the room, but I suspect there's quite a few y'all here at this meeting that are fixing to hit the ground in the next 12 months for sure, and figure out what are you going to do. And this all sounds kind of esoteric and whatever. It's just you just want a job. I just want a job and to get started in the space, but. the beauty of it is that we're in probably a better time than we've been in a long time for you to get some really cool jobs and do some neat things. And my advice there is don't worry about it. Just start and, you figure it out. Because if you look back at this crew, I came to the first meeting here in 88 and 89 and some really good professors grabbed me and threw me onto elevators and said, you will talk to these people. Because I was petrified to talk to these people, but they forced me to. And, nobody would have, maybe Roel, they probably looked at Roel when he went in the room and said, man, that kid's got a great GPA and he's going somewhere.
No, they didn't do that.
Chad, maybe. Me, they looked at me and said, if that boy can drive a tractor, he might have a career as a technician. He might just pull it off. I mean, I wouldn't have predicted I'd have ended up with 5 or 6 companies and be running a multi-million-dollar, $100 million private equity fund for conservation. That wasn't in the cards by no stretch. So just jump out there, land, and go do something cool, and cool things will happen.
I got to do my story on that too. So yeah, I didn't. Y'all are so much better off and so much better students than I am. Every one of you, I guarantee you, without a doubt. And so when I got to work, I went to Fork, Arizona, Game and Fish for 4 years, and I came to Texas Parks and Wildlife. And after I've been there for a few years in Parks and Wildlife, I became district leader. And we had the Southwest section of the Wildlife Society meeting in Alpine one year, and one of my retired professors, the late Dr. Shimitz, came to that meeting with a cane, retired, and he was walking. He edited the second Wildlife Techniques manual. He was editor for that. But he came walking up the stairs. I'm at the top of the stairs, and he remembered me. Out of all the students he had, he remembered me. I mean, he remembers a lot of students, but I know why he remembered me, and it was not for the right reasons, right? Being hungover, taking exams, stuff like that. Anyway, he came walking up, and he says, Billy Tarrant. And I said, yes, sir, Dr. Shimitz, how are you? He shook his hand, and he goes, so what are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm actually first level supervisor, district leader for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And he goes, huh. And just wandered off, Just like you could just see his man. Got that one wrong. I missed that one.
Yeah.
So, there you go. Y'all are going to rock.
Chad. Yeah, I think, Ed, it's a tough one, right? I think what excites me is, and Terry, all of us have talked about this, stars are aligning.
Yeah.
That I have never seen before, right? And it's a lot of the things we've talked about. Conservation and private land stewardship and these things are it's on the news every night.
Yep.
Right? We haven't ever really had that. And so I think that helps us have the dialogue, build the relationships. And I think, when I look, we have more innovation we've ever seen. It's like I said, these young ones that are here are I'm excited about that, right? Yep. There's going to be new innovations and things that we've never even thought of that will be here in even 5 years.
Sure.
And those are the things that I wake up each and every day just excited. And I would say everybody on this panel, right? It's about passion.
Yes, 100%.
That I guarantee you, all of us on this panel don't sleep, right? We sleep 2-3 hours and that's it, because we're constantly thinking about these things. Our wheels are turning, and that's what's fun. And I think we've heard of us joking around and talking, right? This is a family, right?
Yes.
And we have fun, and Roel's down the hall with me, and which is great and probably bad at the same time,
Well, I could tell that from my first Zoom call with y'all. It's much deeper than just a working. I work with this guy. Y'all are in it together.
Yeah, exactly.
Roel.
Yeah. So thanks for the time to think about that. The first
the professor out of all of us.
Well, I think the one, I'd like to say thanks to those that are still in the room and so forth, especially the young professionals. And I say that because, this is heartfelt. I think for all of us, one of the big drivers is the future of the stewardship of our natural resources through the lens and the hands of our young professionals. So I've taught wildlife habitat at A&M for almost 20 years, and I have a textbook that I require. It's a required textbook And so you could add this to your list.
Okay.
And the textbook is the Lorax. So it is a Dr. Seuss book.
See?
And if you haven't read the Lorax, buy that book, read it, and give it to a young person. Okay? But there's a part in the book that says, I speak for the trees because the trees have no tongues. And for young people, you're the Lorax. You're representing the future of the stewardship of our natural resources because they have no tongue. They can't speak themselves. And so that's why we're here.
That's great. I wish I could have heard this panel when I was 23. It would have saved me a bunch of spinning around trying to find where I was supposed to go. But thank you guys. You're awesome. This is so inspiring. Keep up the great work. And really, really an honor to get to chat with you. But thanks so much.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. But thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.